We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks very much. My name is Adam Nordin. I'm going to be the moderator of today's panel, which is Revenue Scale in K12 Education. Joined by a very impressive host of CEOs across the board here. First, Sari, CEO of Edgenuity. Hardeep Gulati from Powerschool. Tim Clifford from Frontline. Rob Waldron from Curriculum Associates. And Scott Kai from TAL. Thanks, everybody, for being here. So the topic today is talking about scale and scale achieved in K12 education. And we're going to try to explore it from a few different perspectives, because if we look at the composition of the audience that's here at this tremendous conference, it really comes kind of into three different buckets. First, you have entrepreneurs and innovators, people who are building the next great solutions to serve this market. Second, you have people who are participants in the market, so various constituents throughout the ecosystem. They may be customers, they may be contributors, but they certainly help to make this conference what it is. And finally, there are investors, and I think that investors who have been observing the scale achieved by many of these companies and the transactions that have occurred, it is certainly attracting a lot more interest and a lot more capital. So I reflect on this conference. The first one, 9 or 10 years ago, there were 400 people here. There's over 4,000 people here this week. We used to talk about companies being 20, 30, 50 million in revenue. Now we're talking about 200, 300, 400 million in revenue, and valuations that certainly are achieving transactions in excess of $1 billion. And there's more than $20 billion of equity valuation that's just joined me here on stage. So the space is very different, and the first question we're going to explore is, why is that? So what's changed in the last 5 or 10 years that's really unlocked the potential in K12 education, whether that's in provision or specifically in education technology and software? And so, Sari, maybe I'll just start with you. What are your thoughts around the different factors that are influencing either accelerated growth or the ability to achieve real scale?
I think a couple things going on right now. Certainly the cost of technology has come down. Devices, there are many more devices in schools. I've seen numbers as high as 30 million new devices over the last 3 years in schools, if that is indeed true. Just the ubiquity and the access that teachers and students now have in K-12. Ever since the economic decline back in the late 2000s, you have school leaders looking at how do we do things different. There was a dearth of curriculum in schools. The curriculum adoptions basically stopped in 2009, 10, and schools were looking for a different solution, a different way to do more with less. Mm-hmm. And I think they saw technology as a way to tackle that. And then third, I think we've got new teachers who are coming into schools who have grown up on the internet. They've grown up with technology. So many of us use technology in our lives for banking, for shopping, for everything else. Mm-hmm. Why not for education? So I think some of those trends have kind of built a need. And then, of course, we can service that need with all the things that we do.
Let's explore that last, the comment about the nature of the constituents changing a bit, because there are a variety of different constituents, obviously, that can influence adoption and purchase decisions. And I think that can vary depending on whether you're an in-class technology or you are perhaps an administrative technology that helps schools to achieve better outcomes and be more efficient. Maybe, Rob, I'll hop over to you. Are you seeing a difference in the sort of the technology curve pushing the former resistance curve, presenting some friction to accelerated growth? And if so, is that teachers, is it the students, is it the administrators, or who's really driving that?
I don't know if it's that different. I think we used to make stuff that wasn't that good, and now we make stuff that's pretty good, and they buy the stuff because it's better. That's how I think what happened. And then the second thing is I think it's underestimated the change to subscriptions. Mm-hmm. So we used to sell stuff that we spent millions of dollars on, and we would get money for 5 years, and we'd run to the sales meeting and have a martini. And then whether they used it or not didn't really matter because we sold it. And now, we, being others than my company, and that was a joke. The SaaS-based world where you have subscriptions, and everyone has to produce gains, and everyone knows what usage is, and then there's no server and no tech people to try to make the server, like that's a big change. That made a huge difference because the schools didn't have enough people to serve what we were making. So we made better stuff, we put it in the cloud, and we're completely screwed if we don't serve them well. And therefore we made better things, and then they bought them. I think that's what happened.
Hardeep and Tim, you both obviously run very successful subscription businesses playing in a different part of the market. How do you think about the evolution of technology and the potential it's unlocked for your businesses, in particular around data and data management and synthesis?
Sure. Want to go first?
It's your day.
Tim and I talked about we're going to be nice to each other. So I think just broadly, the way I look at it, K12 is no different from any other industry, right? So when you look at every other industry evolution, whether that's manufacturing, healthcare, it's gone through a same curve. And definitely technologies, both from factors which Sari and Rob talked about, from technology choices, vendors becoming more sophisticated, the districts buying more subscription, the technology becoming easier to integrate solutions, and for us to be able to put more suite together for bringing best in class. Same thing, like I've spent 10 years at Oracle. We bought 60 companies during that time. We were able to integrate all those things into a whole platform. That's become much easier, which is all kind of bringing easier for districts to buy solutions which work together, integrate so they can get a better value, rather than buying silos and then having to figure out how to integrate and they don't get value from anything. Definitely the data aspect is actually going to become more important. Right now, the way I put it, we're still doing a lot of plumbing, getting districts to put systems which are integrated and unified, and then they can start seeing value of the data. Now, there are a couple of good proof points of where people are leveraging data, but right now it takes humongous effort for them to get there. The whole nirvana vision, when you look at every district, if you walk into a superintendent and say, I can make personalized learning happen, the district superintendent will say, sign me up. But nobody's there yet. Again, you need to do all the plumbing for districts to be able to get there. And that's what's going to be possible in the next few years.
Tim?
Yeah, I'd say, one thing about this industry, which is different from where I grew up, which is in the enterprise space, and where Hardeep was, both of us actually in human capital management software in the enterprise space, is this is such a highly referential market. And when a superintendent or an administrator has a problem and they want to figure out, how do I solve this? They call up all the districts around them and their network. And I think 3 years ago when I joined Frontline, it was still, quote, early, even though it's only 3 years ago, where the reference wasn't as big as it is today. And today, anybody calls around to other districts and they say, what are you using? What are you doing? It's not new anymore. It's proven. It's validated. You can save cost. You can put more time for teachers back in classroom and learning. And so the proof points are all there, and it has kind of unleashed a lot of folks moving in this direction. I think you've also got back to the technology. In 2014-15, the feds pushed their funding of Wi-Fi and network and connectivity from a little over $2 billion to $4 billion. And so I think that opened up things in the last couple of years as well, as more and more of the districts and schools are connected. Still an issue in some rural markets, but to a much less degree than it was 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, that was one of the things that just, Hardeep, as you were making your comments about the plumbing, that I was reflecting on is how do you think about that relative to the funding environment? Because Sari, as you mentioned, we've been in a sustained period where there's constantly a challenge to do more with less and to be more efficient. Yet at the same time, in order to achieve the real benefits that technology can offer, it does require that fundamental investment in order for it to operate smoothly. So how much does that enter the conversation with your customers? And how do you think about defining the value proposition, cost savings and efficiency versus the ability to transform, improve outcomes in learning?
The cost savings and efficiency is pretty easy. So our salespeople have tools now, and they can calculate how much they're going to save. We had a client the other day that purchased our
I'm going to do a one-act play right now, okay, dude? We're going to get that right up there. All right, there we go.
Substitute management.
I didn't do
All
that.
right,
Takes a village.
there we go. The guy was waving. I could not do it. Okay.
I can't see without my glasses.
Okay.
We had a district sign up for substitute management technology, which is kind of Uber for substitutes, right? And they were able to redeploy 3 people that they just used to call for substitutes. Literally employed 3 people to do that. And for $12,000 or $15,000, they were able to automate the entire function. Thank you. I can't go anywhere without you now.
New job is audio technician.
If I may jump in on that one, just I think it's a little bit of a misnomer that, look, funding is a big challenge. That has kept a lot of players, especially the big players, out of the market. But when you look at the data, right, between federal, state, local, there's been funding has been fairly stable. Now, I always put it in this perspective where, you know, a cost of any one of our individual modules is equal to a grande latte for a year per student. So when you put that in perspective and the amount of $600 billion which goes into education, and any of our technology solution, whether it's a SIS, LMS, or you pick a solution which is going to be cost of a latte per student for the year, we can afford it. School districts can afford it, parents can chime in, states, local, you can get a lot of money which is going to help run education better and make student outcomes better. So I don't think money, when you look at it in the perspective of what the cost is, it's not that much. You know, every student per district is getting thousands of dollars, and we're talking about a few dollars per student per module. So I think it's a technology, when you look at every other industry, the ROI is 3 to 7 times, you know, and it's easier to justify that. I think that's a misnomer that money or funding is holding us back. I think it's more the solution and adoption and value and showing what we can do with it. That's what was holding us back.
The bar is higher today in terms of being able to prove that you can drive the student outcomes. I think, you know, in the days when we were making not such great stuff, Rob, that not such great stuff, there were lots of solutions in the classroom, and people were only, you know, selling the relationship, but not necessarily selling the outcomes. And now I hear from school administrators, I mean, it's really about outcomes and proving that, and they've got to see it for themselves. They might take the reference from their buddy down the street, but ultimately they've got to see it working in their classrooms to renew.
Yeah. Well, it seems like outcomes are a particular topic that's been elusive for a long period of time. So people talk about them, but they don't really have the data to support it. It seems like as your solutions become more sophisticated, and they start to connect with solutions like Tim and Hardeep have, you're getting more of a unified data set that actually can illuminate with transparency what's happening in the classroom and how those outcomes are being achieved. It sounds like that's key to really, you know, winning the conversation and engaging it around the sale.
Absolutely. I mean, we get calls, I mean, I think about interoperability. That's really the holy grail, is how do we make life as easy for the educator as we possibly can? And that connectivity between the educator, the student, the parent, and the administrator, so that there is transparent data flowing. I'm seeing schools become more sophisticated. They are definitely beginning to ask the right questions. We used to have, you know, lots of districts ask us to do integrations where they didn't really understand what the objective was, and we had to talk them through, like, what problem are you trying to solve here, and help them through that. I think that's becoming more the norm now than the exception. Schools are getting much more sophisticated about their buying.
Scott, let me come over to you because I think interoperability, both functionally and at the data level, is a very important concept. And TAL really takes a unique approach to how you think about utilizing technology, both technology developed by your organization as well as technology that you access through partnerships or investments. That's a lot of different things to work with. And yet you're able to deliver those in a very seamless environment. So how have you thought about underlying infrastructure and organizing those solutions so that in the end you get the most simple, effective solution for your students?
Yeah, so for TAL, it has been one of the largest education company in the world with market cap around 20 billion. So we invest heavily at the tech side. We not only install all the possible solutions as well as the hardware into our classrooms because we are providing the after-school tutoring. We have our own classrooms. We install the cameras, we install all the sensors, and we also developed our own AI technologies so that the cameras can catch the face lookup of the students to identify whether the students are bored by the teachers or whether they are really attracted by the teachers so that we can give feedback to the teachers. Well, you shall teach better. Well, you shall add some jokes during your class. This kind of technology. But in the meantime, China is such a huge market. We only capture around 1% to 2% of the market share. Although as the largest player there, we still think the in-school market is definitely the largest. So we try to invest into those companies who provide the infrastructures, I mean the IT infrastructures, to enable the public schools to have better data capabilities. For example, nowadays, one of the companies, actually a couple of the companies I'm looking at are providing this kind of OCR technologies using the scanners to scan the examining papers of the students so that it's the easiest as the most efficient way to collect the big data. Because every time there's an examination, the whole schools, maybe more than 1,000 students' answers for the examination paper can be collected. And with this kind of system, you can easily find which class is doing better, which teacher taught better, and which student is good at what knowledge point and is weak at what knowledge point. And through the times, you can have this kind of tracking material or tracking information, just like as you're doing your healthcare check. You collect the data over the times, you know, okay, this student is good at mathematics, this kind of knowledge, he got it very well. That kind of information, that kind of knowledge, he didn't grasp very well. So we think this kind of big data capability provided to public schools can also provide a kind of complementary use to our after-school information. So by investing in both our own technologies as well as support the public school IT capabilities, we just want to have this kind of converged effect. Just as Robert mentioned previously in the Chinese public school systems, all the equipments were provided there, but nobody used. We think our point is try to provide the software solutions to enable them to use the hardware. That's our point.
Interesting. Hardeep, let's come back to this concept of data, because obviously a big part of your investment thesis is centralized around unified data and capturing data from a multitude of sources, putting it into a common data set, and then achieving what we're all trying to achieve in different ways, which is to improve learning and potentially to do that with reduced cost as well. How much have you seen that evolve in the last 5 years alone?
Sure. I think what's interesting is when you look at conversation with not just the big districts, even the mid-sized districts, you'll start hearing words like data governance. You will start hearing words like, how do I really have a data strategy, right? So what's exciting is that the buyers are kind of realizing, all the district, is that I cannot just keep buying all these siloed pieces and having to put everything and integrate real time, all those aspects. Unless all that thing really talks to each other properly, which good luck if you're going to try to buy 10 different vendors and try to make it happen yourself. You're going to reinvent the wheel and you would never get a real-time aspect of it. If you look at even the enterprise market, you typically want your strategy to be built around a unified some platform. And then you can still buy certain best-in-class aspect. You can buy different aspect of the content, but you do need a platform strategy for you to be able to start tying different pieces in your organization. And I think that's what our strategy has been, is that we go to these districts and say, look, we know that you may not use all pieces from us. We also know that you want more flexibility of curriculum and data in which you want to be able to partner with other. But we can help you be the platform to start thinking about how your data strategy, how your master data should live, how your data governance should happen, how you should collect and be able to have big data, and how you would be able to ultimately start doing analytics and personalized learning. So we can give you a roadmap to that path. So our, the big investment and we have been doing is almost really building that platform and the data insights, so we can then start tying all the pieces. And part of our acquisition strategy is for us to know the entire space, for us to be able to do that. If we're going to just rely on partners, then it doesn't get us there. Now, we don't expect every district to use every piece from us, but if we can be their backbone, we can help them with their data strategy and their long-term vision.
Rob, when we think about CA solutions, so the iReady solution and integrated assessment and content, can you talk a bit about how, your views on a closed loop and what's capable versus, say, example, on a content-neutral assessment system?
Sure, yeah. At CA, we get really excited about little levers. So, we have an assessment, an adaptive assessment module, and some other on-grade level assessments that are kind of quick and easy to use. And then we have instruction, and we use that assessment to point to the instruction. And then we can determine, because we have about 15% of the K-8 kids in the United States, we can determine the efficacy of our instruction based on the assessment and keep trying to figure out, why we might not be getting the outcomes we want. And then we, of course, we have built in a lot of service. So 41% of the people who work at Curriculum Associates do service with 100% of their time. So we have a big service operation. And it's the combination of those things that we're trying to tweak. And we're, I think, still far away from maximizing the potential of that. But, we know when we distribute a lesson on, proportional relationships, ounces to pounds, inches to feet, or whatever, that if we give it to 10,000 kids today and only 2,000 get mastery based on all of our data, that our lesson isn't good enough. We can't blame the teachers. And we're trying to make that better, and I want to get to the point where we're not there yet, but we're getting there. I can say that African-American boys on free lunch in the state of California don't have mastery on that lesson, and we have to fix that. And understand things like the Net Promoter Score of the professional development resource in relationship to achievement for a child 6 months later. Because we have a closed loop, doesn't mean that there's not other ways to do it. We can open that loop whenever we want, but I'm super interested in doing those little levers thousands and thousands of times and making it better every year. And that's kind of how we operate.
So a really important, interesting fact is 40% of your people are doing service, not technology, not product.
Right.
Most of the time when we talk about technology solutions in K-12, we're talking about products. How important is the service element, and over what degree of the relationship does that span? Sari?
So I think service is critical. We have found that because there's a difference between buying and using. And so many of the decisions are made on a top-down basis, where I likened it to the mom in the cereal aisle who's going to choose the healthy cereal, but the kid wants the Cocoa Puffs. If we just sell and we're not worried about renewing later, we're not worried about usage from the beginning, we're making a mistake. And so, we put service people in, we make sure that the usage is growing. We need to make sure that the teachers who are using the platform are comfortable with the curriculum and the platform, because if we don't get that usage up, there's not going to be a reason to renew. And if we don't get you'll never get the results if you don't have the usage. So one goes with the other.
Absolutely. Let's switch gears. As we think about the types of things that can drive success and therefore drive scale. Obviously, quality is a very important part of that. Investment, using technology in the products, wrapping service around that so the relationship is holistic. Let's talk about sales and distribution, because this is an area where it's distinct from the quality of the product or the degree of service, but can make a big difference. And I think we've all seen at different points in time companies with very good products that kind of hit a wall in terms of their distribution. So wanted to get your observations, and I can start with anybody here, just jump in. But how much of an advantage, a strategic advantage, is having good sales and distribution and understanding the nuance of how to navigate that process and the right people to do it? And is there an advantage that grows with scale?
I think there's an advantage that grows with scale. I think, this space, the education space, distribution is key. It's king. I think it's really hard to build it. But once you get there and you get scale in your distribution system, it's really, really, really valuable. So for us, we've got over 80 sales reps. So we're down to, in most cases, they only have about 200 districts in their patch. Last year, our statistics showed that about 75% of the deals we closed, we had no competition. And it's because we are local, we're in the districts every day. We can see where there's a problem and we can present a solution. And districts move pretty quickly. If your product is good, as you say, if you got a good product, it solves a pain point for them. The price point isn't too high, as Hardeep says. I think everybody can agree the price points for these solutions, from what I've experienced in other markets, is very, very low, what we're selling today, which is great, especially for this market, that we're able to deliver that kind of value at a price point that's really convenient for a district to fit into the budget. And so, distribution is key, and when you get to that scale, it's very powerful. And I think we're seeing enough companies getting to scale on distribution. It'll probably be harder for other companies coming in to try and build that kind of distribution in a relatively short period of time.
You need the distribution, but you need the product to attract the salespeople.
Yeah.
So it's they build on each other. If you don't have a good product, you won't attract the good salespeople, and you have to continue to invest in that product. So you can't say once and done. I once had an investor say to me, "Well, what would happen if we stopped developing?" I'm like, "You're not going to don't even ask that question now around our salespeople, because our salespeople and our customers expect us to continue to iterate on the product and build new products. And if you don't, you'll lose that sales force, and that sales force is gold. I mean, I would take distribution with a mediocre product over the other way around.
Well,
any day.
I probably don't want to challenge it directly, but I would say I think there's also.
Come on, we were hoping to get a fight.
Come on.
All right, so then
Let's
it
fight
is
out.
on. Well, I would challenge is that I think, I would take product over sales just because there is some level of scale you need, but then there's a diminishing return after that as well. You do need coverage, but I don't want anybody to walk away and say you're going to hire 150 salespeople and you're going to do what Cornerstone did in enterprise market, or what Workday is doing in enterprise HCM market. Because this buyer still buys on a different time frame. They want to still get comfortable. There's still a critical mass of selling to a particular region. When they get comfortable, the next district locally is going to buy it. So sales is not going to just help you just grow. This is where the product can completely change the dialogue in terms of showing the value. So we have kind of structured our P&L completely, differently. We are spending 25% on R&D and only 10% on sales, primarily because we think while we have the scale, so we still have good coverage, but we really can get more out of the product than if I just pump up more sales. I'm not going to get the same level of growth. I would also say that there's also, a lot of this is our industry. The acquisition and previous relationship with the customer matter a lot. So if you're going to completely be a new solution, and even if you have salespeople covering it, and now you're trying to build that relationship with that district, it's going to be hard. But if you have a relationship with district through any of your acquired products, you now can actually go in and much easier to execute that. So 80% of our sales happen in our existing customer base, and a lot of time we are selling them as adjacency to their current products. And I think that is where acquisition gives us, especially both, some of us who have come through consolidation and platform strategy, actually we have a better leeway because we can sell through our cross-sell base.
So let's focus on that a little further, because in particular the notion of thinking about some different markets and how sales can accelerate adoption and penetration versus this market. And the answer is obviously going to be different here for Sari and Rob, or Tim and Hardeep, and Scott. Yours is more of a consumer angle, so a little different. But how competitive is the environment, and how competitively insulated is the environment? What I specifically mean in your instance, Hardeep, as you raised it, is there are enterprise, horizontal software companies that have significantly greater resources that have had no success in penetrating K12 as a vertical. So they certainly have the resources to out R&D you or out sales you, but at the same time, it feels like there still is intense competition within the vertical.
Well, since Hardeep made $3 billion today, I'll agree with him. So
My investors. Let's be clear about that.
I bet you did okay.
All right.
Who's buying drinks tonight, Hardeep?
I think I've gotten to the point, and I hope this doesn't sound cocky. I don't mean it cocky in any way. We don't pay attention that much to the competition. And it's not because we don't think they're doing great work or we're so smart. It's just we don't have time. And we had 60 versions of our software last year, and I'm still trying to figure out why. Like, what's in our software rather than worrying about the competition. And what we're doing all the time is, in what Hardeep said with the relationships, is like, now that we're in, what do you need next? What else can we do? What are they saying? You can't pay that much. So what's so critical when you have a limited amount of capital in order to serve them is which thing comes next on the list. And so our focus is just completely on them in what I think is a very healthy way. And using those relationships to teach the product people. The 41% of the service people yell at the product people to make something better all the time. And the roadmap is a very stressful thing, like which thing comes next. And I think that's so great for schools, for children, for society, that we constantly have to be attentive to that because we're in the subscription world. And I think that's probably different. I remember being with a very colorful man who used to be the CEO of Houghton Mifflin in the 90s. And he's like, I said, can you teach me anything? Because I'm younger at this work. And he said, I make pretty books. Pearson makes pretty books. I hired more salespeople. I sell more books. I'm like, okay, I can do that. That's not this world now. The product features, the results, the usage, it's just so different than the way it used to be. And having that relationship, and it's not because we're playing golf with these people, they're not allowed to. We're actually listening to what they say and making something better constantly with our capital in order to grow. And I'm incredibly bullish on what that will do over a decade for society, because we're going to have to get better.
How much of that interaction is educating the customer on the potential versus responding to a very sophisticated customer?
It's both. I mean, I have to go before customers and say, if I do what you say, you will bankrupt me. I mean, they'll ask for everything, right? And try to describe how we have to choose. But they're educating us a lot too. But I do think that we do have to challenge them sometimes too. Like, are you sure you need that thing? Because it means, if I give you X, it means that we're not doing Y, and get them involved in that. And so far, that's, when you look at, some of the things that have been successful at our company, it's making those choices right.
Yeah. Well, it seems like there's a perception that there's a high demand for customization. And yet, Sari, you've shared in prior discussions that standardization really does fit the need for many instructors, many teachers. How do you find that balance, and how much real tension exists?
I think you have to build some flexibility into your program, product, whatever it is, so that you can meet whatever use cases the customer has. But it's not a market of lots of ones. I think you can bucket things into groups that enable you to say, I'm going to address this market and this market and this market, and look for ways to build flexible solutions. That's at least what we try to do. Everybody thinks they're a market of one, but that's not scalable. And so we help customers and put them with other customers that have similar needs and get conversations going. But it is that constant customer conversation. As you talk about, the educating the customer as well as them educating us, it's a two-way street dialogue. It doesn't have to be all custom.
Hardeep and Tim, do you feel like there's a competitive threat from larger software companies that are not specialized in the K-12 vertical?
I mean, I right now, no. But if I correlate this to the enterprise market, we had a lot of point solutions that started. I mean, it was literally 20 years ago. when I started Workscape in the enterprise market, we were all point solutions. And then that market just evolved like other markets do, and people started to develop more integrated solutions, and people who were friends and would help each other out on deals suddenly were competitors and trying to push each other out of deals. And that developed into a talent management platform, and then before we knew it, Oracle, SAP, ADP had acquired the assets. So I think this market is similar in that it looks too small to the large enterprise players. They have big distribution systems that are very expensive, and for an Oracle sales rep to look at the price point of what we're doing, it's just not going to be interesting. So not only around the distribution, the cost of distribution, I think they'll wait for this market, for a few players in this market to get big enough where it then becomes attractive for them. For them to try and reposition and repurpose their solutions to work in this market, we've seen some of that, and we see them kind of come in and play with a few of the very largest districts and then kind of drift back out again. And nobody ever really makes a very big commitment to come down in the market and really serve, a majority of the districts that are out there. But Hardeep,
I think, as you can tell, Tim and I both have scars from that CM space. And, Workday spends, for every dollar they make, they spend $1.70. And Cornerstones, for every dollar they make, they spend $1.30. You know that they're spending 45% on sales and marketing, and they just flood the market with sales as well as with pricing to just grow, right? Just so that they don't have to be profitable, they just have to show growth. Now that's a very different market in K12, and I've spent 10 years at Oracle, and I can tell you is that I don't see any of the major guys really getting to K12. The reason is, knowing the market now, in the last few years, this market is, in a sense, the most regulated market you can think about. Even in healthcare, you might have a dozen regulations. Well, in K12, I have 60 plus regulatory bodies. Each province, each state dictates every aspect of what they want to capture about the student. So whether even it's a gender, that field is different by state. Whether it's grade, it's different by state. Whether it's demographics, it's different by state. You have every aspect of the student data, and not just student data, but what's happening to the student is dictated differently by state and province. How you want to have initiatives are also dictated differently by every state and province. Now that level of complexity, the regulated aspect, is just not possible not lucrative for anybody to Oracle or Workday to go state by state and build a solution. They like markets where they can go 40, 50%. This is not that market. Well, it's the same reason we also see small companies struggle in the chasm. They build a solution for one niche or one state or two states, and then get caught in the chasm because every other state they need to get into is going to cost them $5 to $10 million, and their VC backs off that I'm not going to give you another 5, 10 unless you're growing more than 20%. That is where the challenge is. I don't see this to be a market where, or unless through an acquisition, I don't see the big technology guys coming in. At the same time, we also see the struggle small vendors have. So it is a market which is much more of a consolidation play than what we have seen in any other market.
Scott, let's switch over to you, because you're obviously, the competitive dynamics in your market are different but quite intense. How have you thought about it as really a founded business that started with minimal scale and today obviously has achieved great success? How much of that is driven through technology? Do you find that there are external participants who want to get into your market, or is it largely single service providers like yourself?
Yeah, so I was actually thinking your previous question, whether the giant software companies will tackle into this kind of market. I think in China, maybe the right question shall be, it's more scalable for the B2B business model in China in the edtech sector, or it's more scalable for the B2C business model. Because in China, it's quite interesting that all the B2B business model seems to be relatively of smaller scale. And all the B2C model can grow much bigger, probably because of the population area. And now, just like TL, we started from the B2C model. We directly provide the tutoring service to the students. And then we realized that, okay, to B market, which I mean to the school market, is also a big market. So we turn our direction. We also input a lot of efforts and resources to tackle into the school market by providing the technologies, by providing this kind of information capabilities. So in China, I also think there's no major large software companies are doing similar thing like we are doing. And we are actually competing against the previous smaller B2B IT software providers in the education sector. I think probably it's probably similar things may happen in the States. For now, all the major players are still B2B business model, partly because no major B2C players come into being, existing here in the market. But after, I guess, maybe after 5 years or after 10 years, when the online education business model thrived, when B2C model enable large companies to provide individual services through online live courses, probably they will start enter the B2B business model as well. So in China, just to come back to the China situation, for now, we are not the only players in China, even with the B2C model providing the after-school tutoring services, but we are definitely the largest one. So being the largest one means we can accumulate all the necessary profits and turn that into a new sector, into the B2B sector. But I guess in the States, as I said, after maybe 5 years, after 10 years, when the newcomers want to tackle into the education IT industry, maybe it's not the existing giants from the software industry, but maybe it's a new model.
Hardeep, let's come back to consolidation for a moment, because I think when you look across the landscape, internationally or domestically, there are a variety of views on the efficacy of consolidation. So is it worth it? Does it work? Your business model obviously has been an aggressive proponent of consolidation. Tim, likewise. At what point does the complexity exceed the benefit, or is it a natural evolution to where the industry will go?
It's a great question, and I think this is where sometimes people fear acquisition is a bad word, right? Now, there are different ways to do acquisition as well. You could be an aggregator, and just you're running it for aggregation, and that's where the bad rep comes from. But if your consolidation strategy is building a solution which is really expanding and building all the pieces, if you look at any other industry, you would say that actually that's a very sound strategy. In fact, more important in our K12 than in other industries. So take example, there is not a whole lot of vendor, and I'm not separating the content vendors from the technology vendors, pure technology vendors, who have been able to scale without an acquisition strategy. The reason being is, again, when you go and try to either expand to another module or state, it is not the high growth enterprise software market, which is going to give you very quick returns. So now you can go back and invest and build another module. So every module you're going to build organically is going to take you time to get that adoption. And that's how you're going to fund your next innovation and being able to break that in. Well, the challenge is it's not easy because that adoption curves are slower than the rest of the market, and the funding required for you can't sustain that. In a best-in-class acquisition, when you're buying a mature product with years of usage, with millions of students already on it, you already got the maturity curve behind you, and you can accelerate the growth on that. But also it gives you the diversification that, let's say if a particular state is not buying LMS for whatever, they have an initiative around data-driven instruction, or somebody has an initiative more around being able to have much more investment on substitute teacher management, better solutions around there, or professional development. Well, you can address that need where the funding or where the initiatives are, rather than being single-threaded on only. So it gives you also diversification that you can tap into the broader initiatives which are different by each state. So the diversification, the consolidation on a platform, and being able to have best-in-class assets, already have the maturity curve, allows you to kind of defend what's the challenge in the industry is that most of the vendors are, I call them stuck in the chasm. If you read Jeffrey Moore's, right, they're not just able to cross that chasm. And acquisition is the only way to get that. And where the technology has made the integration much easier with microservices and cloud architectures, that you can still give that same experience. You still have to innovate and spend dollars to make sure that customers are getting unified platform and unified experience, but you can achieve that without having to go organic. I don't know if, Tim, you would.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, you know, there's several challenges which you have to address, and integration is a big word which applies to the solution set. I mean, you've got to integration the solution set, and as Hardeep says, the user experience, and all that has to happen for the wider solution to be adopted and to make it work. You also have to integrate the people, the employees in those companies, and you have to integrate the customer experience in terms of interfacing with the company. So on the one hand, you can grow more aggressively and you can build a more compelling solution. So districts don't have to, you know, sew together 10 different companies, which that starts to fall apart when it doesn't integrate. But you have to create a unified user experience. We had to go and when we started on this, we've done 11 acquisitions, but a year ago we said we have to design a completely different service model, and we have to take everybody that we've acquired and we've got to retrain them and put them into this system. We've got to buy new CRM technology. We had to rebuild and design the whole infrastructure, just as we did with all of the sales assets that we had acquired. So it's not for the faint of heart. It's a ton of work to do all the integration, but the integration, again, it goes beyond the solutions. It's about integrating with your customers in a way that makes them easy for them to work with you when you're talking about a more complicated solution set. The other thing I'd say is going back to service that we talked about a little while ago. We don't have a big service footprint. We've got 95% of our revenue is recurring revenue and 5% is implementation. We do have a fairly good size help desk and that sort of thing. But what we're finding now as we've gone into the data, and we're bringing data up and insights and benchmarking, so district leaders and directors and teachers can look at, how do I compare to, district my size or everybody in New Jersey or whatever it happens to be. That's where a lot of, I think, service expense, I know for us and probably for other people, is going to increase because clients don't know what to really make of this stuff. So it's great to give them a lot of information, but you can't put them into a jet fighter cockpit analytics engine because it would scare the heck out of them. They probably won't use it. So I think we're really going to have to bring clients along carefully as we start to expose more data and insights, and they're going to want more help knowing, what do I do with this? So, okay, I see that I'm, 16th out of 300 schools in New Jersey on this attribute. That sounds good, but I mean, should I try and get better or should I not? And is my money better off spent in other areas? How does this all fit?
Right.
And I think that's where we're going to see much more service components built into all of our companies as we get richer and richer insights and data for clients, because they are not going to know how to consume it.
Right. So a couple minutes left here. Let's switch to a last topic, which is capital structure. So you have one public company, 4 private companies, 2 companies with no debt, 3 companies with a lot of debt. How do you think about capital structure? Should companies in the K12 space aspire to be public? Is there a synergy or a dis-synergy to being public? And how do you think about the balance of amplifying equity returns with leverage versus investing in innovation with the same debt service capital? Start right here.
Public is hard in the K-12 space. I would tell you that. You need an educated investor to be able to, and to be able to explain the seasonality of the business, the cyclicality of the business. There's a lot to explain. So I think it's really challenging to be public. Fortunately, we're private. It's a great thing. We've got great investors. So I've been part of public companies. The quarterly, what's going on first quarter is the ultimate question, and first quarter is not telling. So that's my take.
Yeah, I may have a different view because
you're more
we
consumer.
we are the B2C model.
Right.
So we do have much foreseeable revenue growth and profitability. So to be a public is very good for us. And in the meantime, I think to be an education company with a public listed status can contribute a lot when we try to promote our brand and when we try to sell to the public side. They recognize who we are and they have trust on us. And in addition to that, I'm also thinking that being a public company can also provide a kind of relatively cheap equity to foster the long-term growth. For example, I just mentioned B2C model might be the real challenge or real alien to the K12 education tech sector. That reminds me about the Amazon. Amazon started as a pure B2C model, online e-commerce, and then AWS becomes the largest cloud-based service, B2B business, right? And for now, in the US, I also think, for example, Google Classroom, Google, for me, is a kind of B2C model. It provides service to billions of users, and then Google Classroom can come to tackle the education market to the public schools. So for us, we also started from the B2C model, but with equity raised by our B2C business, we can also foster our growth in the B2B sector and prepare all the necessary R&D and the sales force for the B2B market IT solutions. So that's what I think public is good. Yeah.
I just maybe to close, the only thing that I can say is I had a zero capital structure model for a decade, just because our owner ended up giving away the shares and we didn't have access to capital. So in my world, I would have made, I'm not sure this is true going forward, but I would have made mistakes if I had access to capital, and not having a dime was pretty defining. And some of the things where people were swinging at the fences and we couldn't allowed our company to survive and thrive. And I look back now at the last decade, I'm not saying this is true going forward, that the fact that we didn't take a dime to go, I guess it grew by 7-fold during that time, is why we survived. I'm not saying, obviously these guys have had great days in the last few months, so nobody can argue with what they're doing, but I can tell you in my case, having zero capital and answering to no one, and I don't think that's true going forward, but was a key success factor. But at our size, you need capital. Now that we're over 200 million, we definitely need capital. We're delighted to have the partners we have, but I think there are a lot of people who didn't make this seat who had to spend a lot of money, as you know.
Tim or Hardeep, any final thoughts?
I would say, I think the retention rates in this industry allows you to have a pretty good leverage structure. You don't have to worry about it. And then second, capital gives you access both from, innovation as well as more consolidation, if you agree that consolidation is still the way to go. But I do agree with Scott as well, that there is a broader B2C appeal as well. We get this from most of the bankers saying, look, half the US population today has Powerschool as their parent portal or on their mobile app. So that gives you a lot of stickiness with the public. So that's a great public profile. You don't have to be growing 20% plus. You can be in the high teens and be a pretty good public play too. But you do need some level of B2C visibility to be able to get that better public access.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that's been said, and I also agree with the notion of incredible discipline when you don't have access to capital like that. I've lived through that environment, and I was glad I didn't have capital. And it wasn't just when I was a teenager, the way these models are working right now with such high retention rates in this particular segment, right? I'm sure many of us have retention rates over 97%, and when you look at gross retention, they can be over 100%. You can leverage the business, and these models are running today, and especially because there's so much runway ahead of all of us. There's so much more that we can grow. 80% of Hardeep's sales are coming from his base. I mean, he's got so many solutions now that he can sell into the base and just continue to rev, as with I think probably most of us here. But the economics are such that you can buy one of these businesses and you can sell it 4 years later for the same amount of money that you paid for it, not increase the value, and get a 30% return on your money. And so that's incredibly compelling. And I think that's one of the reasons that we see valuations going where they are right now, aside from just general market dynamics, but I think in this space particularly.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for your participation. We very much appreciate you making the trip today.
Great.